Hi, and welcome back. Now that we've covered certain organizational changes with regards to structure, let's deep dive into the organizational changes we can make with regards to policies. Most organizations have very rigid policies, especially when they're big organizations and when they need to comply with external regulators, for example, in the pharma, medtech, or automotive space. Many of those policies become key impediments for teams that want to deliver value to customers faster. So it becomes tremendously important for organizations to regularly revisit those policies and think about either adapting them or completely removing them in order to also deal with those impediments. What kind of approaches can organizations take with regards to these policies? Let's go through them one by one. The first one is to replace very strict and rigid policies by simple guidelines. A great example for that is when Mary Barra, the CEO of GM, wanted to introduce more self-organization and more responsibility and ownership within the org, that she revisited the dress code. There was a 10-page document which had a lot of policies around how to dress in certain situations. And they replaced that 10-page document by 2 words: dress appropriately. Another way to change policies is to move more and more towards local autonomy compared to global prescription. Especially for global organizations, it doesn't necessarily make sense to have the same type of policy in every single country. There are differences in terms of culture, there are differences in terms of what the individual business units do, so it's also okay to account for those differences by having different policies. Another type of policy change could be to learn from failure instead of punishing failure. Especially for organizations that aim to become more inventive, more innovative, similar to what Amazon did, it's important to create some kind of policies where people are not punished for making experiments and probably failing, but are actually incentivized to do so. One way to increase the self-organization, self-management, and also ownership in organizations is to move from assigning people to different projects or teams to having people volunteer to join those projects or teams. It's a simple change with a huge impact, and that's also a policy change. One thing that Netflix has done extremely well, and we will cover this as part of our case study at the end of this module, is to remove one policy after the other. In their case, they started out with the expense, travel, and vacation policy, and ultimately ended up removing almost every single policy within their organization. And one final recommendation that I would give to organizations is to revisit their policies, especially when circumstances change. I'll share with you a story from back when I was a medical student at the University of Aachen. Most of my time, I used to study in the library. And in that library, we had a certain policy. Nobody was allowed to bring in their jackets and their backpacks. Why? Because that library did not have an alarm system, and people tended to steal books from that library. Now, the problem was, whenever we left our jackets and our backpacks outside of the library, some other people used to steal those. Ultimately, the student council raised some money and bought an alarm system for the library. Unfortunately, the policy that we were not allowed to take in our backpacks and jackets was not immediately removed. It made no more sense, but still, based on the habit, and based on people not questioning what the policy initially intended to, people did not remove it. Personally, I had a ton of debates with people working at the library that this policy did not make any sense, and it took them several months to ultimately make that change. My guess is, when you listen to this story, that you have a bunch of policies in mind within your organization that probably make no more sense. So they were created at one point in time where they made sense given the circumstances, the context that the organization was in, but with today's standards, with today's context, those policies are not relevant any longer, and in the worst case, they become true impediments for teams that want to do something great for their customers. So go and revisit those policies. Think about them, put them into context, and if they make no more sense, remove them. In our next video, we will talk about organizational metrics as one other lever to change an organization's culture. See you there.